News Talk 1400 KFRU is proud to present the KFRU Heritage Series. It's a one-hour perspective on the events and the people whose lives have contributed to the heritage of Boone County. The KFRU Heritage Series from News Talk 1400 KFRU.
The Heritage Show is nearing its first year of existence, and we have been privileged to learn so much about our community and about our county and about individuals who have unique perspectives and experiences here and beyond the county's borders. And we're going to introduce you to Gladys Swan today, who is an artist and a writer, and we welcome her to our program. It's nice to meet you. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you.
You let's set the context for your connection with Columbia. You have been here for how many years?
I think 25 or 6 now.
What brought you to Columbia?
Well, I was invited to come and teach at Mizzou, so teach creative writing. It was not long after my first novel was published, so I came from Indiana, where I'd been teaching at a small liberal arts school, and began to teach creative writing here and some literature.
What year were you here and started your career at Mizzou?
1987.
1987. And for how many years did you do that?
I did it for about 10 years.
The experiences in the late 80s as you came to Missouri, did you have any idea of what Columbia, Missouri was going to be like?
Not really. We'd traveled through on I-70, but I really had no sense of what Columbia was like, and I found it a very pleasant town. I liked the environs, and I liked the people, and also just the town itself.
What kind of classes did you teach?
I taught beginning and advanced creative writing, sometimes the graduate course, and I taught some literature as well.
I never had enough nerve to take a creative writing course. When you teach beginning creative writing, what do you focus on?
Well, of course, I'm a fiction writer, so the content is mainly fiction, but my purpose in teaching the beginning class was not necessarily to produce writers, but to encourage people to use their imagination. And I figured that if they enjoyed doing that in writing fiction, they might enjoy doing it in other pursuits as well, that the imagination was the key thing, and educating the imagination has been really a primary goal of my teaching and a focus in my writing, too.
How did you get in touch with imagination? What was it that spurred that interest in you?
Well, I think it was early on. I was interested really in the arts. At first, I wanted to be an actress, and as many young people do, they get stage struck. And I found it really interesting to learn that I could be different people, and I think that took me in the direction of fiction writing, writing, and also the visual arts. I found those really wonderful avenues for imagination, and I wanted to, in my teaching, I wanted people to become connected with images that were important to them. I've frequently started out with images of place because we all have places that are interesting to us, that have had an effect on our lives, whether it's mountains or ocean or whatever. And then to have people write or paint from their sense of what those places mean to them. And so it starts with image and then it goes farther.
I had read about your comments in a couple of newspaper articles that you have done over the last 5-6 years, and I saw your focus on imagination and on image, and I wanted to ask you, I'm so glad you brought that up, that an image is something that I can see. If you would ask me about images that I would have about where I grew up, I can see real places that existed. They may not still exist in that way. Imagination, to me, and I would have to have you help guide me through this. Imagination is something that maybe I only see in my mind as opposed to something that is real and literally existed. So how do I like the starting point of images, but where does that become imagination?
Well, suppose you take one of those images that had a real influence on you, and you started writing about it. And there are things that you remember, and you can put those down, things that really happen. But perhaps you come to a place where you don't remember. So that's where your imagination comes in. So then you can invent. There is this feeling among many people that it's not true if it didn't actually exist, if it's not a fact. But writing fiction is learning how to lie well. And so imaginative experience is also true. There is a truth to the imagination as well as to what one can learn empirically through science or observation. There is a truth to the imagination. That is, it can tell us things about our experience, and a good piece of fiction or poetry touches something in us that is true if it's good.
Did you ever have that line from where what you're writing was based on true events in your life that you just kept moving farther and farther from until you said, I don't have anything biographical anymore, autobiographical. I have something that I've created and made up, and it's okay.
Yes, I do that all the time.
Was it hard to bring the students to that? Because I could see what many of us would feel most comfortable would be writing about something that we knew happened and describing it.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden thinking, oh, it's okay for me to indulge my imagination and move past that.
Right. Sometimes it's hard to convince students that that's a good thing to do. And I have one exercise that I used to use, and that is to ask each student to write a brief autobiography in which they include something that's absolutely false. And then we read them in class, and I ask the class to try to pick out the thing that is the, quote, lie. And very often they're wrong. The things that seem most false are frequently true things that really have happened. And the things that seem most true may be false. So in good fiction, there is this inventiveness that comes in. And although much of it may be taken from life, but even then there is a selection. You leave some things out, you put some things in, you emphasize certain others. So you are using your imagination to do that too.
Gladys Swan is our guest. We're talking about literature, talking about her experience as a writer and her teaching of writing to others. How many books have you published now?
I've published 10, and I will have, for about the past 17 years, I've been working on what turned out to be a quintet of novels based on the first one, which was published. It was called Carnival for the Gods. And it will be published in ebooks by an outfit in Paris, Kiwi Publishers. It will be published by them.
17 years you've been working on a quintet. So you've done 4 of them?
Well, the first one was published in the Vintage Contemporary series, and then I'd never expected to return to that particular world. In fact, the novel is a kind of comic fantasy. I never thought I'd write such a thing, and I never expected to return to that particular world. But then I started making notes for a second novel, and then I thought finally it was a quartet. But then there's a character in the first novel called Amazing Grace who dances with snakes, and she had to have her story too.
How about that? So when you have something that has been in your mind for that long, how do you keep it fresh? How do you say, do you step away from it? And then I guess my follow-up question to that is not only keeping it fresh, but when you step away from something that is a creation, do you ever worry about returning to it with the same energy, or perhaps remembering the same thing that drew you to it in the first place?
I don't worry about that. I find that getting some distance from the work is a good thing, because when you are really passionately involved in writing it, you're down inside it. And getting the distance gives you a chance to look at it critically and see, well, maybe this should be this and this should be over here, and maybe that character isn't well enough developed. Those are not the thoughts you have when you're down inside it. Those are the thoughts you have when you step back. So both are necessary in the process.
Tell us about some of the other books that you've written. You mentioned those. You call that a comic fantasy.
Yes.
Is it harder to write the comic part of it or the fantasy part of it?
Well, I think it's all one thread, but I never expected to go in the direction of the fantastic. I started off thinking I was a realistic writer, that I was writing about realistic things. And then I wrote this novel, and suddenly I was in a different territory where I never expected to be. It was an extraordinary discovery. So then I started a second novel, which was also published, called Ghost Dance, a play of voices, which is set in New Mexico and has a lot to do with the territory where I grew up. And I thought that was going to be a straightforward, realistic novel. Well, it's not. It turned strange on me about two-thirds of the way through, and so I had to account for that. And so it has elements of fantasy in it, and much of my work since then has gone in that direction. And it's been a great discovery, because I find that through elements of fantasy, you're asking about truth in fiction, that you can get to elements that you might not get if you took a realistic direction, that they have their own kind of truth. And so I've been really interested.
Do you know what the truth is going to be when you start out on a novel?
No.
And how do you explain to people, because of what you just said also, you never had the idea that you would end up where you ended up, or that it took that direction. How do you describe to people? Because writers say that. I mean, we hear that from English teachers sometimes, and I can remember hearing it in English classes. You discover through the process of writing. I think so many times readers or non-writers, they say, how do you do that?
Well, I think frequently I start with an image or with something I've overheard. When I started Ghost Dance, it was because a friend I knew, the town was in the midst of a real depression, and there were soup kitchens. It was terrible time economically for the town. And someone said, this is a town that no longer deserves to exist. And somehow that struck me. I mean, I didn't know why, but it just struck me. And so I started writing about a series of characters in the town. And I had known a man who was a kind of trickster. He used to do all kinds of things. He claimed that he had found an original Persian text, and it was a fraud, and he fooled people into thinking he had a machine that if you put in a dollar bill, a $10 bill would come out. I mean, he did all kinds of things like that.
Now, this is a real person?
This was a real person, and so he entered the novel as a kind of figure that everybody had some questions about, and kind of started turning things upside down in the book. And, I had to let him just go where he wanted to go. I think that's it. I think it's being open to what your characters and situation might offer, rather than approaching with an idea already formed. Whenever I've tried to do that, it has been the kiss of death.
Are you surprised then at what you say this? Wow, if somebody would sit down and look at this novel of mine and try to apply a lesson to it, are you ever surprised at what lesson they could apply to it?
I suppose. I hope nobody tries to do that.
Fantasy not meant to have lessons or morals?
Oh, yes, it is. I'm sure that everything that I do reveals its own particular set of values, because I'm the one doing it, as every writer does. But I hope that rather than putting it in terms of a lesson to be learned, that people simply enter my books as as an experience, that here is an experience with these characters in these situations, and that perhaps it touches something that they feel is true.
We're going to take a break, and we'll come back and visit more with Gladys Swan. She's our guest. We're enjoying and inviting you to stay with us. KFRU.
This is the KFRU Heritage Series. More coming up on News Talk 1400, KFRU. This is the KFRU Heritage Series.
We continue to talk on our Heritage Show today on KFRU with Gladys Swan. She's a local artist and teacher of literature, writer, novelist. She has told us in our first segment that she has 10 books, working on another one. You mentioned imagination, and you write fantasy. You said that is what you've written. A lot of people would say that is the epitome of imagination, if you can work up a fantastic world. Not everybody is cut out to write fantasy or to enjoy fantasy, I would contend. But imagination can play a part even in the most realistic writing that you would see somebody do.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And how so? How does that play into that? Is it the word choice? Is it the character development? What is it?
Well, it could be those things. I think it's an ability to make the reader feel that this is entirely believable, that it did really happen. And I think anyone who can do that has made a real achievement. I think that any kind of approach can be not only legitimate but extraordinary if it is well done. Just as any artist can take a realistic approach, he can try to make a realistic portrait or landscape, but he might go in the direction of something entirely surreal or abstract as well. And all those things are worthy and legitimate. I think whatever an artist can do to draw a viewer in and make it really impressive and vital is worthy. And I would say that's true in literature too. There are a variety of approaches.
How much did you read fantasy when you were growing up? Anything stick in your mind that impressed you and influenced you?
Well, from a very, very early age, I loved fairy tales, and I read them. And then I went to the house of my husband-to-be, and he had all kinds of books of fairy tales that I hadn't read. And so I read those with great interest. And then later on, as I began reading particularly people like Jung and Marie-Louise von Franz, I learned that they were terribly significant in terms of the kind of wisdom that they presented. So I continued reading in that direction. And of course, there is a lot of literature that has its foundation in the fantastic. I loved Alice in Wonderland, for instance. It was an important book, and other things like that.
You, when we talk about critic, is it? Are you more stifled in creativity by outside critics or by your inner critic, or not you personally, but do you think people? Which one is tougher?
Well, both can be very off-putting, I think. Many great books have been received with a storm of criticism, or many great works of art have, mainly because they're unfamiliar. And people tend to get settled in what is familiar, and what breaks the rules for them is daunting at first. They have to take it in, and it takes time to do that. Even the Impressionists, which everybody seems to love these days, received a storm of criticism when they first had exhibited their work. So people have to learn how to see differently and think differently, and it takes a while to do that. I think even Huckleberry Finn had a lot of critics when it was first published. So we see that happening all the time. And there are works that are not understood in their time and come to have to their prominence later on, like Moby Dick, for instance. When Melville died, he was an obscure writer who had written a couple of popular books in his youth, but Moby Dick pretty well killed his reputation. So that happens all the time. So the outer world can be very daunting, but I think the inner critic is also hard to deal with. I had a student who couldn't finish anything because she thought it was just terrible. She just couldn't think it could be any good. And, of course, so much great literature has already been written. I mean, we can be daunted by Shakespeare or Homer or Dante. They've written the world's great books, and other cultures have them too. So if we think about that, nobody would write.
Yeah.
We have to push all that aside and just leap in.
You need to read that, be familiar with that, but not be intimidated by it so that you can't do anything.
Right, because the world always needs to be reinvented.
Yeah.
It grows stale, and poetry and fiction and the visual arts and dance and all the arts help us renew the vitality of the world. So it's not something that you say, well, the great books have been written, nobody else need apply. No, we have to keep doing it because we need it. We need to have fresh eyes to look at things.
Gladys Swan is our guest on the Heritage Show on KFRU. You are an artist and a writer. Which came first in your life, or are they so entwined that you could not separate one from the other?
I would say that. They are really so entwined. I loved painting and drawing as a kid. I loved trying to write things. So really, both of them came. I would be a musician, too, if there were world enough and time. I love the arts. They're just a great source of pleasure.
What do you think about their place in a young person's education now? Where is that, and what would be a danger of skimping on that?
Well, I think there is a great danger because the arts allow for one to express oneself and to therefore come to some kind of knowledge of what one likes and how one sees things. And I think that education needs to emphasize them rather than to skimp on them because they're so important, I think, in the development of the personality and the imagination. I think the imagination is a neglected faculty, really, and that it needs to be encouraged and educated. Children have it. Children come into the world with it. They need to be encouraged all along the line and not lose the sense of its importance.
How do you do that? Because it seems like almost, even if they grow up in atmospheres at home or perhaps in a daycare or some kind of an atmosphere that encourages that, I don't see anything that's saying not to have that. But there are pressures somewhere in the world that seem to stem creativity and an imagination.
Well, I think there's so much emphasis on preparing for a career, making money, which are necessary things. I mean, we have to have a livelihood. If I had depended on the arts to create a living for me, I would have perished long ago as a writer or a visual artist. Not many people can do that. And I think that it's too bad that that's the case, that there isn't more provision for the arts, more public funding of artists. They have, I think, more of that in Canada and in England, or did, where young people who were in the arts could get a kind of stipend from the government to work as artists even before they were making a living at it.
Some of us are hampered by a increasing self-awareness that occurs as we get older. I just think it's in our personality or so, and I think that is a tremendous drawback or wall that you can't break through to continue to have a certain freedom of ideas and a freedom of just pursuit that would lead to more creativity and imagination.
Well, I think that's true. Everybody's so busy, too. They have so much they have to do, and they're so rushed. And I think if we had more time for just playing, it would be helpful.
So do you play at your age? Do you play now? Would you say, I play in this way?
Yes, I play all the time. I play with colors, and I play with words, and with, taking risks with things. That's a form of
Describe
playing.
we've talked about your writing. Describe your art. How do you characterize it?
Well, again, I started off doing landscapes and figures, and I like doing those. As I've gone on, my work has become more and more abstract. And again, this is a surprise to me because for the most part, I didn't like abstract art when I was younger. I didn't see the point of it. It just didn't appeal to me all that much. And now I find myself deep in the midst of it, and I love doing it, and I see how it can become a very important way of a form of expression also.
Are you a studier? Do you study that? And as a transition, and maybe as you felt the urgings to go towards more abstract art, did you say, well, I better understand where I'm going, so you studied it, or did you get there and then take a look at what it meant?
Well, I've looked at the work of various artists all along the way, and I have my favorites, of course. And then as I've moved more in the direction of abstraction, I've looked at the work of a number of abstract painters to try to see what they were doing and to find my own way with that too.
People understand the work that goes into being a novelist of well-received and published work, or an artist. It seems like some of us think that it's just something that kind of evolves and you fall into it, and oh, look, one day I've published something, or one day I've created a piece of art that people seem to appreciate.
Well, that's not how it works.
I was afraid that it wasn't that way, but too many people think so, I think.
Well, it's maybe not so obvious. We don't expect somebody merely to evolve into being a dentist or a scientist or a theoretical physicist. We know that it takes a long course of study and preparation to be any of those things. And it's true with the arts as well.
Gladys Swan is our guest. Do you go when you look at artwork in this community, how do you evaluate the artistic community in Columbia right now?
Well, I think there are many very good artists here. I think I'm always delighted to find people that I didn't know and to see that they are doing really very good work.
When you know of some of the, having lived here since 1987, you came to teach at the University of Missouri, reactions to certain artwork, like the artwork at the Columbia Library outside its walls, or other places in town, and we have the 1% for Art that's a part of new public buildings, and they always seems to stir debate. Could you help us to find some educated perspective on those discussions and the opinions that clash sometimes?
I don't think so.
I should not have asked a yes or no question there. But no, I mean, it's kind of entertaining, I would think, for someone to say, who has an understanding of art, to say, as you probably would be able to, it's stretching opinions, it's stretching boundaries, it's understanding that someone has that perspective and has been able to create that in a piece of art.
Yes, I would say so. I think it's difficult to settle matters in a particular direction because we have our tastes in art, and you can't really argue about those. I mean, there are things that I don't like. When I go to paint at the Vermont Studio Center, I'm always fascinated because they have such a range of approaches. I think they deliberately try to get a great deal of variety in what people do. So they have installation art, which for the most part doesn't appeal to me. There are certain things I've seen that I thought were brilliant, but for the most part, I don't care for installation art.
What is installation art?
It is where an artist comes in and maybe takes a particular environment, sets up maybe even some video screens and plays things, might have some music come in. There are a great variety of things that people can install. And it's done for a period of time, and then it's all dismantled, and it doesn't exist anymore. So some people find that very satisfying. For the most part, I haven't cared for a lot of it. So there can be great debates about the value of that, and some people will think that it speaks to the present moment and offers something very vital and interesting, and some people may not care for it. I'm always interested, too, when I go to the center. There have been a number of Asian artists there, and I have found the exposure to their particular aesthetic very, very revealing to me, very important, just to see that they have a completely different take on things, many of them. And I don't know, I can't say that it has influenced me in any particular way, and yet I feel that it's been influential. So I think it's difficult to narrow something down and say this is it or this is not it. I mean, you have that horrible period of socialist art in some of the socialist countries where you have workers dignified by great statues, and mostly it's terrible stuff. And I think when you have a culture dictating that one kind of art should be the official art, you're going the wrong way. So I think you do best by remaining open to the variety that can be created.
We need to take our final break, and we'll come back with one more segment on our Heritage Show. This week, our guest is Gladys Swan. You're listening to News Talk 1400 KFRU.
This is the KFRU Heritage Series. More coming up on News Talk 1400 KFRU. This is the KFRU Heritage Series.
We've enjoyed talking to Gladys Swan during our Heritage Show today on News Talk 1400 KFRU. Artist, writer, teacher, Columbia resident since 1987, but you split your time between other places. I want to ask about the stimulation in the environments that you spend your time in, because I sense talking to you that growth and stimulation, always encouraging new and different experiences, an important part of your life. Is that a correct assumption?
That's certainly true. I love to travel, and I do a lot of it. I have two places that I like to be. One is the Maine woods, and the other is the mountains of New Mexico. Those are two places I spend time at. But I've also traveled in Europe, Latin America, and Asia.
You mentioned last segment the Vermont Studio Center. How many times do you go there?
I go there once a year, and I've probably been there 10 times. I'd like to go there because I find the presence of other artists and writers very stimulating there. And I taught also for 15 years in the MFA program at Vermont College in Montpelier. And it was a low residency program because people worked and had families. But the people in it ranged in age from mid-20s to 70. And they had been everywhere, and they had done everything. There were cooks and nurses and a psychiatrist, an engineer, doctors, lawyers, you name it, all with an interest in writing. And they were extremely interesting people. So I enjoyed that connection also. I've enjoyed being in places that where things are done differently and seeing what those differences are. And so I've traveled as much as I can.
Do you find Columbia offers some of that also, some of the stimulation that makes it interesting? Because many would say that there is a wide variety of individuals that make up this community too.
I would agree. Yes, I've certainly found it here as well.
Where do you do most of your work here when you're doing your artwork?
Well, I do some of it down at Orr Street, some of it out of doors. I have my own studio at home, rather neglected at present. I need to put it in order before I can step into it again. And my writing, most of my writing, I do simply at my desk.
When you were thinking about, were you ever tempted to leave the Columbia community once you were done teaching? Because, like you say, you travel, you like to be in many places. Mm-hmm. New Mexico has a strange, it's not strange, but a strong allure to you of going there because of your connection there growing up. And New England, it sounds like that's something that's very much, and the Maine woods sound a beautiful place to escape. You could spend time between both, but you continue to have feet also in Columbia.
Right, yes. Yes, this is my foundation.
And no temptation. What makes it a place where you like to stay connected?
Well, I have many good friends here, and I like the presence of the university. That has been a pleasure, and I think the programs in music, the art exhibits are very interesting.
Do you find the environment, the place, what kind of effect does that have on what you can produce in your artwork?
Well, I do landscapes, so I've done them here and enjoyed that, and I've done portraits, some of people here. I could probably be happy other places, but I like my roving life, and I like having Columbia as a place I come back to.
From the Maine woods to Taos, New Mexico, the woods seem not closed in, but the woods are woods. Mm-hmm. New Mexico,
mountains.
Talks to me of a different total atmosphere. I guess got to have them both.
Oh yeah. I live in the woods on the edge of a lake, and it's 24 miles from the closest town. So there is no plumbing, no electricity, no television. So it gives one a chance to be open to very much to the natural world, and I've written about that.
How much time do you spend there?
2 months.
2 months. Summertime?
Yes, July and August. And I swim every day and walk in the woods and feel very happy.
What's it like in New Mexico?
Well, there I've lived mostly in other people's houses, and I had a lovely residency, well, two, at the Wurlitzer Foundation, which is a residency for artists, writers, and composers. And so they have been places where I have done work, where I have painted. I love painting the mountains there and hiking in them. So I like the hiking both in Maine and New Mexico.
What do you tell people as we grow near to the end of our time that we have for our program? I'm curious as to how you encouraged students, how you encourage people today that cross your path to expand their horizon, to challenge themselves in a new way. You spoke of imagination earlier in our interview. Mm-hmm. There are certain things that I think you have as an example, clearly, but then also how do you put it into words to tell people what they might be able to do in their lives?
Well, I start with a workshop that I have done at various times and in various places. It's called Heightening Imagination, Drawing and Writing from the Image. And so that's where I encourage people to find images that are important to them and then to try drawing something. And I mean that in terms of whatever they want to do with it. That is, if they just want to express something in colors, that's fine. Whatever they want to do with that would express something in their response to an image that's important to them. And then to write, just to write whatever comes to mind. And then we talk about these things. In fact, I'm going to be doing such a workshop next fall in September at Ghost Ranch in near Abiquiu in New Mexico. That's George O'Keeffe's old territory.
Wow.
And actually, my partner in that is the librarian at Ghost Ranch, who worked for a number of years with George O'Keeffe, cataloging her personal library. So we're doing something called Poetry en Plein Air. That is, we're trying to get not just poets, it's called that, but people interested in poetry and writing, get them out of doors to respond to the beautiful landscape around Ghost Ranch and do some painting and sort of work from the images there. And that, of course, can connect with other images. So those are what I have to offer in that direction. I did such a session at the public library here back in April. And so I can do this, in a couple of hours session, and I can take it farther. I could probably teach a whole semester doing that sort of thing and take it in a variety of ways. But that would be the premise I'd start from, that one gets a hold of one's images, looks at them, and then puts them in a larger context, too. There are universal implications of the images that we have, and there are ways of exploring those and making them much richer. So it can be a continuing exploration doing that.
Well, I appreciate you sharing with us what you've shared with us today about your life and about your creativity and imagination.